24 people waiting.
Great. Very, very warm welcome to you all. Great to see you here. As you can see, possibly we're downstairs in Breathing Space at the London Buddhist Centre. So this is the Breathing Space Shrine Room. My name's Manjusiha. So I'm here with wonderful team, Jahit and Wayne and Britta, doing the tech side. And you'll also see them in front of camera a bit later on. And I'll say a bit more about that when we come a bit closer to it. But just got a few minutes just to say very warm welcome, and please do say hello to each other in the chat as well, and say where you're situated, it'd be nice to hear who's joining. So I don't know if there's any sort of names that we recognise, and new people as well. Yeah.
So there's Manjusiha, who's thanked Jahit for letting everyone know that we're late.
Great, yes. So welcome to Manjusiha, and apologies for a few minutes late. The joys of the tech, but we're glad we're here now. Yeah, so very warm welcome to Manjusiha, who I think is in Pune in India, so that's great. We're already international. It's great. Yeah.
And then we have lots of people streaming, and actually we have Linda Holmes from windy and grey Chesterfield.
Great.
Yeah.
Very, very warm welcome to Chesterfield.
And then Adriana is saying hello, good evening everyone.
Adriana.
And there's Robert Rowe from Southwark.
Great. Yeah, good to see you, Robert. Yeah.
And Fred from North London.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, welcome, Fred.
Anna as well is here from Cambridge tonight.
Great. Yeah. Welcome, Anna as well. Yeah, it's great. And particularly welcome if this is your first time joining us at the London Buddhist Centre. Yeah, I mean it's really lovely to be able to broadcast and teach, and we'll share this space with everyone. I think particularly love sitting in front of this beautiful painting. So I feel like we're sitting with the Buddha, we're sitting with the Buddha's disciples and the Bodhisattvas this evening. So it's really wonderful. Actually, I used to work at the London Buddhist Centre here, and when I first joined the Buddhist Centre, this was actually my office. I mean, not just my office, but this is where the team was based down here. I just say, and it was great working here, but it makes a much better shrine room, I think, than an office. It's great to be down here. I'll give other people a few more minutes to join us as well. Maybe I'll say a little bit about the programme for the evening. So we'll do a short meditation, just maybe 10 minutes or so shortly, which I'll lead us through. And then I'm going to talk about this wonderful novel, Ulysses. That's the main content of the evening, and also what it can tell us about spiritual life, what it tells us about myth. Just touching on some of those areas this evening, and I've really enjoyed preparing for the evening. So we'll see what emerges, and we'll have a short break, just 5 minutes or so. Somewhere probably around 5 to 8, and we'll finish by 8:30 this evening, and we will have some readings from the wonderful book that I'm going to talk about. So you'll see people appearing as if by magic next to me here, we'll have 3 or maybe 4 readings from the novel. Yeah, so that's the format for the evening. Yeah, so you're very welcome, and I also I don't know how long I'm going to speak for, but I do hope there'll be time for questions at the end, if not answers. But hopefully there'll be a time at the end for a bit of Q&A, so we can see what's been sparked off. There might be some James Joyce devotees and fans watching as well. Even if you've never heard of Ulysses, even if you don't know James Joyce, it's an evening for you as well. Yeah, so that's it. Okay, so maybe let's make a start. So yeah, let's start just with a little bit of meditation. So wherever you are, on your sofa or on your cushion, just make yourself comfortable. So there's a sense of just sitting in a way that's relaxed and comfortable, but also upright. And we'll just sit for 5-10 minutes just to collect ourselves, to settle our minds. So you might want to have something to support your hands as well, or just put them on your lap. And as always with meditation, it's very good to start with just an awareness of the body. So direct experience of the contact of the body. So closing your eyes, just seeing what you can feel of the contact with the ground, contact with the chair, the support beneath you. Seeing if you can have a sense of letting go more fully into that support. So just checking if you're holding on in the legs, seeing if you're holding on in the belly, just seeing if you can let go of any tension you can feel in the body. So feeling the effects of gravity and the contact with the earth. And also having a sense of uprightness, alertness even. So the sense of the spine rising up in its natural curves, so that you're sitting upright but relaxed. So, allowing the face to be soft, allowing the jaw to be soft, allowing the hands to be soft. Now we just notice that the body's breathing. So this natural process of the breath coming and going. Just see if we can take an interest in the sensations of the breath, wherever we can feel them in the body. So we just see if we can stay with those sensations of the breath in the body. Just noticing when the mind wanders off and coming back to the breath, coming back to those sensations. Practice of mindfulness. It's a practice of noticing and coming back. And finally, we can bring our awareness to the heart center inside the chest. So the center of the chest, seeing if you can feel anything in the heart center inside the chest. And tuning into how you're feeling just at the moment. Then just letting go of any effort, just sitting for a few more moments, doing nothing. So just sitting. Then, when you're ready, opening your eyes, coming out of the meditation. Okay, great. So I'll say a few more welcomes just in case others have joined us. So, my name's Manjusiha. I'm here at the London Buddhist Centre with a wonderful tech team in the Breathing Space Shrine Room. And we're here for this evening on myth, storytelling, but particularly the novel called Ulysses. So what's going to happen is I'm going to introduce the novel or some thoughts about the novel. As I say, many of you, or some of you, will be familiar with this book, and then we'll have a few readings as we go through as well, and a break. First of all, I was thinking about when I first encountered this book. So I studied down in Southampton. So I went to university in Southampton on the south coast. I didn't study literature, I studied engineering. So that's one thing to say. Some people who read my novels will probably understand that. I studied engineering. But I had a friend, I remember at university, so this was actually a friend from school, but she was studying literature somewhere else. And she was recommending novels to me, and I'd always loved reading as a kid, and then I'd sort of gone into this scientific and technical sort of study. But there was a bookshop in Southampton called October Books. So I lived in a bit of a rough student sort of part of town, and just round the corner was October Books. And I remember going in there, and for some reason, the book that I picked up at that time was a book by the American novelist Jack Kerouac. So the Kerouac book I picked up, I had no idea why I picked this up. I just, I picked up a book called Desolation Angels by Jack Kerouac. And it's an interesting book, Desolation Angels. Essentially it's a book about being on a solitary retreat. So Kerouac based the novel on a summer that he spent fire watching up in the mountains. So this was a job where I think you just went into a hut somewhere up a mountain and looked for fires, and you were there the whole summer. So he was there for months. And as a writer, that's great, So and it's it's essentially a solitary retreat. So that was that novel. And I think the reason I mentioned that book is it's quite interesting, isn't it? Certain moments in our life. Looking back on them, they are important, almost you could say turning points, really. Because the other thing about Kerouac was he was very influenced by Buddhism, by the Dharma, if I can trace the thread of me sitting here in London Buddhist Centre Shrine Room in a way back to that moment as well. Obviously there are many other moments, but that moment was significant. Another thing to say about Kerouac was, James Joyce was a very big influence on him. One thing you probably know about James Joyce is his style of, well, in Kerouac's phrase, it would be probably spontaneous prose, but stream of consciousness, or there's other ways of talking about it. I mean, James Joyce was a very big influence on Kerouac. Famously, Kerouac wrote On the Road on a single 120-foot sheet of paper. I mean, it's not quite true. I mean, he basically just kept taping more and more pieces of paper until he had this 120-foot long scroll, which was coming out of his typewriter. And, the legend about On the Road was that it was written in this 3-week frenzy. And I think it was 2012, the British Library had the original manuscript of On the Road. And for me, it was like a pilgrimage going to see it. It's like a religious text. And it was, it's a great privilege to see this long glass cabinet with this manuscript in it. So that's On the Road. So, I mean, I think mainly what I'm talking about here, as a sort of preamble to talking about James Joyce and Ulysses, I'm talking about lineage, I think. So, talking about creative lineage, literary lineage, and sort of honouring that. And it's just, it's really good to sort of trace that. Obviously, in spiritual life, very important as well, to have a feeling for the lineage. And the lineage is alive as well. So yeah, that was. I think that's how I came to James Joyce first, and through reading about Kerouac, and following that lineage. So another feature that Kerouac took from Joyce was something about the novel as being a great experiment. So you have novels which are trying to portray everyday reality in words that are straightforward, and we know with Ulysses that's not the case. With Ulysses, it's a difficult book. It's very difficult to read, I think, at times. It took me years to read it, if not a whole decade. So I'd read a part, and then I'd put it down sometimes, for months or years, and then pick it up. And eventually I did get to the end of it, and I'm very glad I did. And I've been sort of going back to it, and there's some real sort of lovely memories of reading that book in different places. So it's not an easy read, to state the obvious. One way of talking about experimental fiction, I like the term anti-novel. So anti-novel, which I think, I can't remember who came up with that term. They were inevitably French. So it's sort of the anti-novel, so I'm just going to read something about what David Rose. So David Rose is a contemporary writer. What he says about the anti-novel. He says basically he's talking about the novel, the normal novel that we think of, and the anti-novel and their relationship. He says, so the anti-novel was in fact born with the novel, like Siamese twins, and has shadowed the novel through its history. And then he talks about matter and antimatter. So yeah, the anti-novel and the novel, in a way, they were born at the same time. You can sort of think about a novel like Don Quixote, which is from 1605. That was part one of Don Quixote, and it's incredibly modern, incredibly postmodern, you could say. So yeah, with with anti-novels or experimental novels, the great anti-novels, they're not trying to be difficult. They're not trying to make us look stupid. They're not trying to make me look stupid. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get to the nature of reality. That's what they're trying to do. And that's what James Joyce is trying to do in this novel, this great novel, Ulysses. He's saying the way we see things, the surfaces of things, everyday common sense reality is not ultimately true or real. So that's the project, I think, of the anti-novel. It's trying to get behind our perceptions and trying to see, well, what actually is real? What is the nature of reality? I think that's the project that James Joyce has in this book. David Rose says, the questions the anti-novel ask are, what can we know of the world, and how do we experience it? So that's that's the project, I think, of Ulysses. And it's interesting talking about twins in relation to Ulysses. Because the twin of Ulysses, you could say, is the Odyssey. The Odyssey. So the Odyssey, this great epic poem from antiquity, Homer's great poem, the Odyssey. Basically, what James Joyce did was he very sort of hidden and not always that easy to interpret, but basically the whole of Ulysses, this modernist novel, is based on the structure of the Odyssey and the different episodes of the Odyssey. So that's what James Joyce did. So you can see these two works side by side, and it's really interesting. I mean, personally, I've really enjoyed over the last couple of weeks just delving a bit more into both and trying to understand what do those episodes mean? How do they look different in the two works? And we'll hear some sort of extracts sort of exploring that, and we're just gonna lightly touch the surface of this topic. There's so much to say, but yeah. So I'm going to start at the beginning, and I'm going to start with the Odyssey, actually. And I'm going to drink some water. So if the Odyssey is the structure and the framework, so where does the Odyssey start? So I'm just going to read the first few words of the Odyssey. So the Odyssey says, "Sing to me of the man, Muse, the man of twists and turns, driven time and again off course, once he had plundered the hallowed heights of Troy." So I'll just read that again. "Sing to me of the man, Muse, the man of twists and turns, driven time and again off course, once he had plundered the hallowed heights of Troy." So, and this is, I think it's always important to name translators. So this is Robert Fagel's translation of the Odyssey. So yeah, I mean, some who are watching will know this area better than I do. But yeah, you'll know that the Odyssey is a great tale of Odysseus trying to find his way home after the Trojan Wars, and all of the trials and tribulations that he encounters in trying to find his way home. Yeah, and it's 10 years. So the Odyssey covers a period of 10 years of Odysseus trying to get back home, trying to get back to Penelope's wife and his son Telemachus. So that's the story. It's a great epic story, isn't it? And yeah, just in terms of plot, I mean, so Ulysses has, as I say, very similar plot. I mean, one thing to say about Ulysses, so the Odyssey is 10 years of action. You'll probably know that Ulysses takes place in the course of a single day. So that's one difference, of course, and maybe I'll say a bit more about that. But they're both stories of journeys. It's interesting with plots. I've been told in the past, I think there's only really two plots. You can boil all of the great stories, any story really, down to these two plots, I think. So one plot is someone goes on a journey. The other plot is a stranger comes to town. So basically, those I think are the two plots that we have, and this is clearly the first, isn't it? Someone goes on a journey. I mean, there's other journeys as well, which I'll come on to, but and the word Odyssey, is synonymous, isn't it, for an epic journey. I think it's really interesting thinking about the spiritual life and thinking about the Dharma life. And really, I'm quoting Maitreya Bandhu here. Maitreya Bandhu's he said, we can think of the spiritual life as a life of peace, and hopefully it's that at times. But he was saying, and I really agree with this, it's probably better to think of the spiritual life as an odyssey, as a journey which is perilous, difficult at times. But one that we go on because it's the best thing to do. It's the best thing to do with our lives, So in a way, this is the archetypal journey, the archetypal odyssey that we're talking about here. In both of these books. Another thing to talk about, from those first lines of the Odyssey is the reference to the Muse. Really interesting, isn't it? In that Greek tradition. So it was an oral tradition, and you read those works, and almost always they start with an appeal. So in this translation, it's something like "Sing to me of the man, Muse." So it's an appeal to the goddess to be. The modern idea of a writer as creating something, it doesn't really sort of stack up when you look at the early tradition. The idea is that you are, inspiration literally means being breathed into, doesn't it? It's that link with respiration, with breath. So the appeal is to the muse, to the gods and goddesses, to breathe into the poet, so that he or she can tell the story. So I find that very interesting, and I really so there's a sense of sort of getting ourselves out of the way, and also being receptive to something beyond our usual self-referential sort of way of being. So I think that's really really interesting as well, just in terms of the importance of receptivity to creativity and to the spiritual life as well. So yeah, that's where the Odyssey starts. So what I'll do is I'll just tell a little bit more of that story, and then we'll hear a bit from the early part of Ulysses, and Britta will read that section shortly. Yeah. The first part of the Odyssey. It'll be fine, Britta. You'll be great. The first part of the Odyssey, it mainly deals with Telemachus, which is Odysseus' son, and he goes on his own journey. So his father's been absent for 10 years. His home is besieged, so Penelope, his mother, has all of these suitors. So these men who want to take her hand in marriage. Odysseus has been away for 10 years, and as far as they know, they don't have any news of him. He could be dead. So Telemachus decides, and this is a story of becoming a man really for Telemachus. He decides he's going to go on his own journey to try and find news of his father, and that's also an epic journey for Telemachus. He goes through his own sort of trials and tribulations at the start of the book, and eventually he finds someone who he thinks might have news of his father, whether his father's alive and where he might be, and that person is Menelaus. Might have got the pronunciation wrong, but Menelaus. So Menelaus he's also someone who. He came back from the Trojan Wars, also lost men, he was also a leader. So on his way back from Troy, from the Trojan Wars, he found someone who could tell him news of his own men and also of Odysseus. And it's a very, very interesting episode. So he encounters this figure who is referred to in the tradition as the Old Man of the Sea. So the Old Man of the Sea. And really, the Old Man of the Sea is a god figure called Proteus. And the interesting thing about Proteus is, so Proteus, if you can pin him down, he will tell the truth. So that's the feature of Proteus. He tells the truth. He can see the future as well, and he will tell you the future if you can pin him down. And sounds straightforward, doesn't it? But Proteus has the power basically to shapeshift. So he can become, in the Odyssey, he becomes, as Menelaus is pinning him down, he becomes a serpent, he becomes a panther, he becomes a tree, he becomes a stream of water, a wild boar. So if you can hang on to him, through all of that shape-shifting, he will eventually give up and he'll tell you the truth. So that's the myth of Proteus. So that's something of how Telemachus gets news of his father through Menelaus talking to Proteus. And we'll hear from Britta. So Britta will appear in the shot. And I'll just say just a few more words before we hear the short reading from Ulysses. So Ulysses starts with Stephen Dedalus. So Stephen Dedalus is a young man. So he's like the Telemachus character. He's like the son character. And basically, the only other thing I'll say is, in this episode we're going to hear this short section. He's basically walking along the mud flats on a strand in Dublin where Ulysses is set. So, hand over to Britta.
Ineluctable modality of the visible, at least that, if no more, thought through my eyes. Signatures of all things I am here to read. See spawn and see rack, the nearing tide, that rusty boot. Snot green, blue silver, rust, colored signs, limits of the diaphane, but he adds, in bodies. Then he was aware of them bodies, before of them colored. How? By knocking his sconce against them, sure. Go easy. Bald he was, and a millionaire. Maestro di color che sano. Limit of the diaphane, in. Why in? Diaphane, a diaphane. If you can put your 5 fingers through it, it is a gate. If not, a door. Shut your eyes and see.
Thank you very much, Britta. That was great. Yeah. Beautiful reading. Yeah. So yes, really beautifully read, and it's lovely the poetry, I think, of that reading, isn't it? And so that's from quite early on in Ulysses, and immediately it's dense, isn't it? What do we make of this? I mean, it's like it's one of the features of this book is, we were talking before about this word diaphane. With so many of these phrases and words in Ulysses, you Google them and you realise it's a whole universe. It's almost like you're pulling a little thread from one phrase, and you realise, there's a whole world, a whole universe here. One thing to say about the novel is it's like a maximalist novel. You can talk about minimalist novels, which are very, very constrained. This novel is trying to tell, it's like a book of the universe. It's a book of truth, really. We spend the rest of our lives exploring that passage, I think. Beautiful passage. I mean, I loved it when I was listening to it just then. It was like the feeling of the shipping forecast as well, I think, didn't it? Really nice sort of poetry. But yeah, I just want to mainly make the parallel with the Proteus story. So James Joyce doesn't name his chapters after the Odyssey, but we know that was the plan because he sent a couple of sketches, you could say, to friends. So it's very, very well structured. So this is a section called Proteus. It's not the mythical figure of Greek myth. What Stephen Dedalus is doing here is basically he's wrestling with perception. He's taking the data of his senses. He's on this strand in Dublin, and he's trying to make sense of reality. So you could say, he's wrestling to get to the truth, but it's almost like an intellectual and maybe a spiritual contest that he's engaged in to try and find the truth. So just very sort of broad sort of parallels with Homer, with the Odyssey. He's drawing on the philosophical tradition. Again, I've been sort of looking into this passage. You have Aristotle in there. His theory of colour. You have I think late 17th century, 18th century, early 18th century philosopher called Bishop Berkeley, who talked about phenomena. How do we know what hits our retinas is actually real? All we have is the sense of what comes in through our senses. How do we know what the world is like if all we have is what comes through our senses? So it's in that territory that reading comes from. So that sort of sense of trying to get to the truth in that way. Another great monster, you could say, although I think Proteus isn't really a monster. But another monster in the Odyssey is the Cyclops as well. We're going to have a reading from Wayne shortly from the Cyclops chapter of Ulysses. But before that, I'll tell the story as it is in the Odyssey, because again, it's really, really interesting. With these stories and myths, we can have, I can give an interpretation, and it's always just one interpretation, isn't it? These myths and symbols are multivalent. We can never exhaust their meaning. Actually, I think that's one of the great beauties of delving into these stories and these myths, whether it's the modernist version or the ancient version. They are like mirrors, I think, aren't they? Reflecting us back and showing us truth and what's real, I think. So with the Cyclops. So in the Odyssey, there's a Cyclops called Polyphemus. I mean, this is an island of Cyclopses we're talking about here. So this is just one particular Cyclops. And, in this journey, Odysseus is with his men, and they're on this island. They're still trying to get their way back to Ithaca, back home. And so they encounter this particular Cyclops. So a Cyclops is a giant one-eyed creature. It's a giant one-eyed creature. I don't really know why they decided to go into this Cyclops' cave. I mean, it's not what I would necessarily choose to do, but that's what they did, So the scene is Ulysses. Just to say, Ulysses is the Latin translation of the name Odysseus. So you have the Greek and the Latin. Basically, it's the same name. Ulysses and Odysseus. Odysseus and his men, they're in this cave, and basically, this Cyclops comes back, and one of the things he does is he seems to tend sheep, and this is like a giant cave, and all of these sheep coming back with the Cyclops, so they're hiding in the cave, and I have to cut this story quite short, really. But one of the parts of the story is when the Cyclops actually sees Odysseus. It's pretty terrifying sort of exchange that's going on, and the Cyclops asks Odysseus, "What's your name?" And he says, "Nobody." That's my name, Nobody. That's what my mother and father call me. That's what my friends call me. And again, this is a really interesting episode in the Odyssey. What eventually happens is, and it's another feature, I think, isn't it, of the Greek stories? They're pretty bloody, aren't they? And but Odysseus stabs the Cyclops in the eye with a brand, with a flaming stick. So that's what happens in this episode. It's pretty brutal, and so he blinds the Cyclops, and the Cyclops is crying out in pain, and the other monsters, the other Cyclopses, are running to the cave, and they say, what's happening? Who's fighting you? Who's trying to kill you? And he says, "Nobody's trying to fight me. Nobody's trying to kill me," and they go away again. So this is the ruse. It's just again very, very interesting story which we could really look at in a lot more detail. But that's the parallel with this section that we'll hear from Wayne shortly. So maybe Wayne can take the storytelling hot seat. So. And as Wayne does that, I'll just say that again, you're probably familiar. The main character in Ulysses is called, he's a Jewish man called Leopold Bloom. So Leopold Bloom, he's the Odysseus character in Ulysses. He's the one who goes wandering, and so we'll hear now from Wayne from the Cyclops episode of Ulysses.
Bloom was talking with John Wise, and he quite excited with his Dunduckety mud-coloured mug on him and his old plum eyes rolling about. "Persecution," says he. "All the history of the world is full of it, perpetuating national hatred among nations." "But do you know what a nation means?" says John Wise. "Yes," says Bloom. "What is it?" says John Wise. "A nation," says Bloom. "A nation is the same people living in the same place." "By God then," says Ned, laughing. "If that's so, I'm a nation, for I've been living in the same place for the past 5 years." So of course everyone had to laugh at Bloom, and says he, trying to muck out of it, "Or also living in different places." "That covers me then," says Joe. "What is your nation, if I may ask?" says the citizen. "Ireland," says Bloom. "I was born here, Ireland." The citizen said nothing, only cleared the spit out of his gullet, and gob, he spat a red bank oyster out of him right in the corner. "After you with the push, Joe," says he, taking out his handkerchief to swab himself dry. "And I belong to a race too," says Bloom, "that is hated and persecuted. Also now, this very moment, this very instant, go, he near burnt his fingers on the butt of his old cigar. Robbed," says he, "plundered, insulted, persecuted, taken what belongs to us by right. At this very moment," says he, putting up his fist. Sold by auction in Morocco, like slaves or cattle. Are you talking about the New Jerusalem? Says the citizen. I'm talking about injustice, says Bloom. Right, says John Wise. Stand up to it then, with force like men. That's an almanac picture for you. Mark for a soft-nosed bullet, old lardy face standing up to the business end of a gun. Gob, he'd a done a sweeping brush, so he would, if he only had a nurse's apron on him. And then he collapses all of a sudden, twisting around, all opposite, as limp as a wet rag. But it's no use, says he. Force, hatred, history, all that. That's not life for men and women, insult and hatred. And everybody knows that it's the very opposite of that that's really life. What? Says Alf. Love, says Bloom. I mean the opposite of hatred.
Wow, thanks so much, Wayne. Another wonderful reading. Just to say, when we were putting this evening together, Jahit will read later, and Jahit told me the tech team that we had for the evening, and I had this idea of it being more interesting for you, for all of us, if the tech team could do some readings. And I mean, it's remarkable the readings we've had, isn't it? So thank you so much, Wayne. That's brilliant. Wayne did say he might attempt an Irish accent. I thought he was joking, but he pulled it off so well. So that's great. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah. Strong reading, isn't it? And strong content. So what's happening here is Bloom is in the pub. So he's in the pub. And this is a conversation, particularly with one character who's called, in the book, he's called the Citizen. There's, again, so much to say about this this reading in this episode. As is clear, the Citizen has got a very sort of narrow-minded view. And Bloom is standing up to that. Leopold Bloom is standing up to that in the scene. It's interesting, that James Joyce, chose, a Jewish man as his central character. A sense of being an outsider in Dublin at that time. There's a whole theme through the novel. And basically that's what the Citizen is bringing, isn't he? This question, what's your country? It's a real classic question that you ask the outsider. And Bloom is an Irishman, so he's saying, well, this is my country. And it also there's a section in the middle that we didn't hear actually. So this reading is it's a continuation of the discussion, but there is a bit in the middle as well. But yeah, in the second section, he's also talking about his race and persecution and everything else. And another man in the pub is saying, well, why don't you stand up? Why don't you stand up to it? Why don't you fight back? And Bloom is saying that's not the way to do it. That's not what life is about. Life is about love, and it's a beautiful definition, I think, that he gives. Love as the opposite of hatred, we'll sort of hear more on this theme as we carry on through the evening. But you could say that's what Ulysses is about. These characters, so the three main characters. Stephen Dedalus, who is like the son character, and then Leopold Bloom, who is the equivalent of Odysseus, and then Molly Bloom, who we'll hear a bit later. They're all about quietly standing up standing up against force, standing up against cruelty, and it's really interesting, that story about Cyclops and the name that Odysseus gives himself. He says, "My name is nobody." You could say that's one of the features of Ulysses, that they're not great heroic characters. They're very, very ordinary human beings. Leopold Bloom, his job is as an advertising canvasser. I don't know actually what that job involves, but it's a pretty mundane job, I think. An earlier scene, he's going to the newspaper offices, to talk about placing an advert or something like that. These are ordinary people crisscrossing in Dublin on a single day and going about their lives. But at the same time, they are heroic, particularly with this echo back to Homer and the Odyssey. They are heroic. There is something of the gods in them as well. To make the parallel a bit more explicit, even, I mean, maybe it's clear enough. That the Cyclops here is the citizen, of course. It's the idea of narrow-mindedness. It's just just having one-eyed view, not having another perspective, a wider perspective. It's that profound narrow-mindedness that comes across in this episode, that Bloom is standing up to, and there's sort of interesting things that Joyce does. So Bloom has got a cigar, and we heard that he almost burns himself with the cigar, and that's sort of classic Joyce. I mean, he's pointing to the flaming stake that blinded the Cyclops. Earlier in the episode, Bloom's walking down the street, or actually it's the narrator walking down the street, and I think it's a chimney sweep with his poles, almost sort of pokes the pole in the eye. And again, that's all, it's making these parallels and just actually having a lot of sort of fun with that, really. So, yeah. Okay, so let's just have a pause at that point. So we'll just have a 5-minute break before we hear more from these two works, these two parallel works. So you could recharge your teacup or whatever you have, and yeah, we'll start again at 8 o'clock. Yeah. Great. So we'll restart so where to next? Maybe I'll fast forward a little bit in terms of the Odyssey, and so eventually Odysseus does arrive home. I'm sorry if that's a spoiler for you, but I'm sure you know that anyway. So after these trials and these encounters, and again, I mean, just going back to the earlier point about the spiritual life and the idea of there aren't shortcuts, are there, in the spiritual life? We do encounter difficulties. We do encounter monsters in a way, and in a way we need to. I think often we can say that these difficulties are outside of us, but they are our teachers. Actually, I think for me, when I've had difficulties in the spiritual life, that's when I've really learned, and that's when I've really, I think, deepened my practice. Actually, and it's it's good. It's not always like that, of course. There's great joy in leading a Dharma life and leading a spiritual life, but in my experience, it's also unavoidable to come across these trials. And stories, you could say, the reason people go on journeys are in storytelling is to grow up, to put it in those terms, and certainly it just seems to be the nature of things, doesn't it? If we stayed at home, maybe there'd be other challenges, but we go on a journey so that we can grow. And so, eventually Odysseus finds his way back to Ithaca, and Britta will read from the Ithaca section of Ulysses. The readers are daunted by Wayne's recent performance, so there won't be any more Irish accents, but we'll have marvellous readings, I'm sure, as well. So just to say a bit about the Ithaca episode, I mean, in Ulysses, I think it's my favourite part of the book, actually. Another thing to say about the novel is that James Joyce uses so many different styles in the book. In a way, we've heard two of the styles already, really. I don't know how you would characterise the scene in the pub, but it's the tone of voice is sort of quite aggressive, I think. To invoke the Cyclops, and we know about the interior monologue, stream of consciousness, and we'll hear more of that shortly as well. This Ithaca episode is in sort of scientific language. I was sort of looking into this a bit earlier on today. I don't know the religious sort of tradition, but basically what it says about this chapter is a catechism, which I think is basically probably in the Catholic tradition, you have these books that you're supposed to. They're books of questions and answers. Kieran might know. I don't know. I don't know what your religious background is either, but it's books of questions and answers, and you're supposed to memorize the answers as a way of deepening your understanding of that religious tradition. So that's the sort of style. But also what Joyce does is, as I say, it's like a scientific version of that. If Britta would like to take the reading place again, that'd be great. And as in the Odyssey, at this stage, father and son have found each other. In Ulysses, they're not literal father and son, but the older man, Bloom, and the younger man, Stephen, have found each other. And what they're doing is they're going back to Bloom's house together, and it's that's the homecoming in Ulysses. So whenever Britta is ready.
What act did Bloom make on their arrival at their destination? At the house steps of the fourth of the equidifferent, uneven numbers, number 7 Eccles Street, he inserted his hand mechanically into the back pocket of his trousers to obtain his latchkey. Was it there? It was in the corresponding pocket of the trousers which he had worn on the day, but one preceding. Why was he doubly irritated? Because he had forgotten and because he remembered that he had reminded himself twice not to forget. What were then the alternatives before the premeditatedly, respectively, and inadvertently keyless couple? To enter or not to enter? To knock or not to knock? Bloom's decision? A stratagem. Resting his feet on the dwarf wall, he climbed over the area railings, compressed his hat on his head, grasped 2 points at the lower union of rails and stiles, lowered his body gradually by its length of 5 feet 9 inches and a half to within 2 feet 10 inches of the area pavement, and allowed his body to move freely in space by separating himself from the railings and crouching in preparation for the impact of the fall.
Thank you very much, Britta. Yeah. Another beautiful reading. It's great. Very clear. So yeah, again, you get a sense of the style of this passage. I mean, this is one of the most simple parts of this episode. It really does get sort of quite, cosmic. There's philosophy, there's cosmology, there's so much in this episode. So basically what's happening is Bloom's forgotten his key, and he's finding his way into his house. Writers don't like to talk about influences, but certainly this episode I think has been a big influence on me. My last book, someone reviewed it recently and said one of the characters takes 50 pages to take a key out of their pocket. So yeah, I think I definitely had this episode in mind with that writing. So yeah, I really love this episode. I don't know. Maybe I'll just sort of carry on and take us towards the end of the book as well. Just to say, I think we will have a bit of time for any questions and answers as well. So you may wish to put questions in the chat, and we can see what we can sort of discuss there as well. So that's Ithaca, yeah. So Ithaca, the homeland of Odysseus. And yeah, so finally he returns home to Penelope, his wife. And yeah, just to say, so Penelope in the Odyssey has been faithful the whole time, despite being besieged by these actually 108 suitors. That's what the Odyssey says. These men who are looking for her hand in marriage. She's been constant. She's been faithful to Odysseus throughout, and for Odysseus's side, the image of Helen, I think has been there all the time. Of course, he's been trying to get home for 10 years, and again, I mean, this might be putting it a bit sort of crudely or something like that, but there's something, unless we have desire for the journey, we won't make it. We won't even sort of set out. I think it's really interesting with the spiritual life. We can feel like, I shouldn't be feeling something. I shouldn't be desiring. But I think if we can't cultivate some desire for the goal, for something higher, then we won't be willing to go through the trials and tribulations, really. So that's one way I sort of think about this journey, not just in the Odyssey, but in all fiction. In a way, it's the character. The way that plot is talked about, you have the inciting incident. So that's the moment when the character decides, even if they don't want to go on the journey, they're going to go. And behind the inciting incident is desire, the desire. And in spiritual terms, it's sort of love for the goal, love for the Buddha. However we frame it, that actually keeps us going, I think. So I think that's good. So in Ulysses, the Penelope character is called Molly Bloom, Leopold Bloom's wife. I'm just gonna, I can't remember the date that the novel is set on. So it's, just checking. So all of the action it takes place on Thursday, the 16th of June, 1904. So that's entire volume. So 16th of June 1904, and again you probably know that's a date that's celebrated around the world as Bloomsday. So people mark that occasion, and the reason that Joyce wanted to set the novel on that day, it said. It's because basically that's when he started going out with his future wife on that specific date. Joyce's wife, Nora, so her maiden name is Nora Barnacle, which I think is such a beautiful name. It's almost like a name from fiction itself. But that's why Joyce chose that day, and that's why it's sort of celebrated still. So Molly Bloom. So it has to be said, in Ulysses, she hasn't always been faithful. Actually, part of the story is she's been having an affair with Blazes Boylan. But eventually, I think because of his his brutality, that's one thing that Richard Ellman says. So Ellman is James Joyce's great biographer. It's his interpretation of why Molly discards Boylan, is because he's not human enough, really. Again, it's this sense of love and non-hatred and that sort of connection. Again, that's Molly's journey. Part of Molly's journey in the book is moving away from that sort of animal sensuality without feeling. That's how Richard Ellman puts it. Eventually, she, almost like despite herself, she is faithful. She is faithful in a sense to Leopold Bloom, and at the end of the book, she yields to Bloom in some ways. And this is the most famous passage in the novel, isn't it? I mean, this is the extraordinary, extended, unpunctuated or not very punctuated. I think it's probably 4 sentences or something like that in total across many pages. This incredible stream of consciousness, interior monologue of Molly, Bloom's wife. So I will welcome Jahit to read from that passage. And what we're going to hear is basically the last section of the novel up until the last word of the novel. Yeah, so whenever you're ready, Jahit.
And the poor donkeys slipping, half asleep, and the vague fellows in the cloaks, asleep in the shade on the steps, and the big wheels of the carts of the bulls, and the old castle, thousands of years old, yes, and the handsome Moors all in white and turbans like kings, asking you to sit down a little bit in their shop, and Rhonda with old windows of the posadas, glancing eyes, a lattice hid for her lover to kiss the iron, and the wine shop half open at night, and the castanets, and the night we missed the boat at the Algeciras, the watchman going about serenely with his lamp. And oh, that awful deep down torrent. Oh, the sea crimson sometimes like fire, and the glorious sunset. And the fig trees in the Almedera gardens, yes. And all the queer little streets, and the pink and the blue and the yellow houses, and the rose gardens, and the jessamine and geraniums and cactuses. And Gibraltar as a girl, where I was a flower of the mountain, yes. And I put a rose in my hair like the Andalusian girls used. Or shall I wear a red? Yes. And how he kissed me under the Moorish wall, and I thought, well, as well him as another. And then I asked him with my eyes to ask again, yes. And then he asked me, would I? Yes, to say yes, my mountain flower. And first I put my arms around him, yes, and drew him down to me so he could feel my breasts, all perfume, yes. And his heart was going like mad. And yes, I said yes, I will, yes.
Thanks so much, Jahit. I just want to let that reading sort of resound, it just, again, beautiful, just evokes that, the end of the novel. If you can imagine that's sustained, across many pages, just the beauty of it. And, in a way, I don't want to say anything about it. I want it just to sort of, Jahit's beautiful reading just to sort of resound with us, and we can sort of feel the effects of it. So that's all I was going to say. I really want to thank our wonderful readers for stepping forward in front of the camera and reading so wonderfully. And maybe the final thing I'll say before I see if there are any questions from people is that last word, yes. That's where the novel finishes. So you could say James Joyce is saying yes to life. It's interesting again with the lineage of the writers. Another writer I love and revere, you could say, is Samuel Beckett. Beckett was Joyce's apprentice, I think, in some ways, wasn't he? So he was a young man in Paris when Joyce was working on Ulysses, I think. For Beckett, he had to find a way of getting out from that shadow. His way of doing that was through paring down, actually sort of saying no, and just like really, trying to sort of look in a minimalistic way at reality. Joyce, the maximalist, saying yes to life, and Beckett coming later. But maybe that's a whole other evening. Maybe I'll just see if there are any questions from anyone or any thoughts. Okay. Do feel free if you have questions. That's great. Thanks for joining us for this exploration of this wonderful book. What I'll do, I think, is maybe we'll just have a short sit to finish. I'll give a few announcements as well, and then I'll read the Transference of Merit and Self-Surrender as well, to sort of mythically bring the evening to a close. So announcements first. Well, I want to particularly welcome and encourage you to join us tomorrow for the day on Padmasambhava, so Padmasambhava Day. So these festival days, they are wonderful celebrations, I think. We've got this wonderful day tomorrow. So it starts at 10 in the morning and finishes in the evening with puja and mitra ceremonies. So I really hope you can join us for that. Britta's probably putting the links into the chat for that, so do please click on those and have a look and join us tomorrow. I don't know if I was supposed to be linking this evening to Padmasambhava in some way, and I haven't really sort of thought about that until now. But when we were sort of talking about it earlier, what came to my mind was Padmasambhava is a bit like Proteus, I think. So this shape-shifting, magical character. So he is responsible for establishing Buddhism in Tibet, as many of you will know, and really incredible mythical and magical story of how he accomplished that. So if I were to have to choose some link, then it would be to Proteus, I think, and that story that we heard earlier. So I very much hope you can join us tomorrow. And here in the UK, we and worldwide, we are in the middle of the global pandemic, and it's very hard for so many of us in terms of health, but also in terms of keeping the centre like this going, keeping businesses going financially. What we offer at the London Buddhist Centre, we offer very freely. We're not supported to teach. We're not financially supported to be here and to put the tech on. And we rely on we give generously, and we rely on your generosity to keep going. So if you are able to donate financially, it really will help. It's a great thing to do, actually. I really enjoy giving to the Buddhist Centre. It's one way that I feel connected and part of the project of the Buddhist Centre. So again, the link probably will be in the chat. Great, and just click on the link if you're able to give. Great. Please do, and it's very, very much appreciated and helps us to keep going through these times that we're living through. Okay, and maybe that's all I will say in terms of announcements, unless anybody wants to remind me anything else. But okay, it's great. So I do just want to say, thanks to the team here. Ordinarily, you don't see the team, I guess, but this evening, you have the team have been doing all the tech side behind the camera, which has been great, and then these wonderful these 4 wonderful readings that we've had from the team, really, really lovely. Really want to thank you all for all of what you've done this evening and the readings. It's great. Thanks for saying yes to doing it. Let's just finish by just sitting for a few moments together. So just a few minutes. It's nice to have a ritual end to the evening. So once we've sat just for a few minutes in silence together, I will read the Transference of Merits and Self-Surrender, which is really just saying, anything we've enjoyed or benefited from coming together in this way, we share that freely. We hope that's for the benefit of all. Yeah. So just settling again. Feeling the ground, feeling the support beneath you. Letting go of any tension again in the body. seeing if there's a sense of gratitude in your experience. If there is, you can dwell upon that. What we dwell upon, we become. So any sense of gratitude, well-wishing for yourself and others. Just sitting together in stillness with a sense of appreciation. Then I'll read the Transference of Merit and Self-Surrender, and that will be the end of the evening. So feel free to repeat the lines after I speak them. May the merit gained,
May the merit gained,
in my acting thus,
in my acting thus,
go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
My personality throughout my existences,
My personality throughout my existences,
my possessions,
my possessions,
and my merit in all three ways.
and my merit in all three ways.
I give up without regard to myself,
I give up without regard to myself,
for the benefit of all beings.
for the benefit of all beings.
Just as the earth and other elements
Just as the earth and other elements
are serviceable in many ways
are serviceable in many ways
to the infinite number of beings,
to the infinite number of beings,
inhabiting limitless space,
inhabiting limitless space,
so may I become
so may I become
that which maintains all beings,
that which maintains all beings,
situated throughout space,
situated throughout space,
so long as all have not attained
so long as all have not attained
to peace.
to peace.
Okay, so that's the end of the evening. Thank you very much for joining us, and go well, and see you soon, I hope.